In the great green tome there was a chorus, and a dragon that had been dead since Sundays, and a picture of a guard jumping over the Mondays, and there were two netches sitting on benches, and a frost trough with a sweet roe, and an orcish oaf with a horka and a storm astronach with the wabberjack, and an oat moth priest who was whispering Magica. Good night, Mondays. Good night, chorus. Good night, guard jumping over the Mondays. Good night, Draugr that had been dead since Sundays. Good night, Frostro. Good night, Sweet Rove. Good night, Orcashove with the Horkalove. Good night, Atronach. Good night, Wabbajack. And good night to the Moth Priest whispering Magica. Good night, Ogrim, Dremoran, Clanfear. Good night, Dradra everywhere. So that's my lore book. So I can just quickly show you. This is Good Night, Mondays. Sleepy book.
I'll read the Holy Sweet Roll liturgy. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll, fluffy, gooey, warm, and sweet. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll. All hail this delicious treat. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll, drizzled with its blessed glaze. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll, our mouths too full to call out praise. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll, nestled in its ebony crate. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll, served upon its divine plate. All hail this Holy Sweet Roll, fluffy, gooey, warm and sweet. All hail the Holy Sweet Roll. All hail this delicious treat.
The sweet row, what is going on here? Bubble water. Yes, I drink sparkling water. Hi, Gohan. He's the best answer ever. Hi, Decimus. Good to see you. Yes, Nefas and I just did a reading of the ESO Lorebook.
Oh.
Yeah, Nefas just read this.
Yeah. Now we can move on to the 6 Christmas stories we got lined up for everyone to read, because it is tis the season.
Exclamation mark, you should read it with passion.
Oh, with passion? No. Well, so we can go like one by
What's today?
What?
Somebody saying webcam and surprise. Yes, I'm just gonna do it once in a while, I think. Okay, so am I going with the Christmas one?
Yep. Do you want to read the Gift of the Magi first, or do you want me to read that first? We'll go like in a rotation, I guess.
You can go ahead first, and then I can read Shoemaker.
Okay. And this Christmas short story is called The Gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all. She had put it aside, 1 cent, and then another, in her careful buying of meat and other food. Della counted it 3 times, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry, so Della did it. While the lady of the home is slowly growing quieter, we can look at the home. Furnished rooms at cost of $8 a week. There is little more to say about it. In the hall below was a letter box too small to hold a letter. There was an electric bell, but it could not make a sound. Also, there was a name beside the door, Mr. James Dillingham Young. When the name was placed there, Mr. James Dillingham Young was being paid $30 a week. Now, when he was being paid only $20 a week, the name seemed too long and important. It should perhaps have been Mr. James D. Young. But when Mr. James Dillingham Young entered the furnished rooms, his name became very short indeed. Mrs. James Dillingham Young put her arms warmly about him and called him Jim. You have already met her. She is Della. Della finished her crying and cleaned the marks of it from her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a gift. She had put aside as much as she could for months, with this result. $20 a week is not much. Everything had cost more than she had expected. It always happened like that. Only $1.87 to buy a gift for Jim. Her Jim. She had had many happy hours planning something nice for him. Something nearly good enough. Something almost worth the honor of belonging to Jim. There was a looking glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen this kind of looking glass that is placed in $8 furnished rooms. It was very narrow. A person could see only a little of himself at a time. However, if he was very thin and moved very quickly, he might be able to get a good view of himself. Della, being quite thin, had mastered this art. Suddenly, she turned from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color. Quickly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its complete length. The James Dillingham Youngs were very proud of two things which they owned. One thing was Jim's gold watch. It had once belonged to his father, and long ago it had belonged to his father's father. The other thing was Della's hair. If a queen had lived in the rooms near theirs, Della would have washed and dried her hair where the queen could see it. Della knew her hair was more beautiful than any queen's jewels and gifts. If a king had lived in the same house with all his riches, Jim would have looked at his watch every time they met. Jim knew that no king had anything so valuable. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knee. It almost made itself into a dress for her. And then she put it up on her head again, nervously and quickly. Once she stopped for a moment and stood still while a tear or two ran down her face. She put on her old brown coat. She put on her old brown hat. With the bright light still in her eyes, she moved quickly out the door and down to the street. Where she stopped, the sign said, Mrs. Sophrony, hair articles of all kinds. Up to the second floor, Della ran and stopped to get her breath. Mrs. Sophrony, large, too white, cold-eyed, looked at her. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Mrs. Sophrony. Take your hat off and let me look at it. Down fell the brown waterfall. $20, said Mrs. Sophrony, lifting the hair to feel its weight. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours seemed to fly. She was going from one shop to another to find a gift for Jim. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the shops, and she had looked in every shop in the city. It was a gold watch chain, very simply made. Its value was in its rich and pure material. Because it was so plain and simple, you knew that it was very valuable. All good things are like this. It was good enough for the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that Jim must have it. It was like him. Quietness and value. Jim and the chain both had quietness and value. She paid $21 for it, and she hurried home with the chain and 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim could look at his watch and learn the time anywhere he might be. Though the watch was so fine, it never had a fine chain. He sometimes took it out and looked at it only when no one could see him do it. When Della arrived home, her mind quieted a little. She began to think more reasonably. She started to try to cover the sad marks of what she had done. Love and large-hearted giving, when added together, can leave deep marks. It is never easy to cover these marks, dear friends. Never easy. Within 40 minutes, her head looked a little better. When her short hair, she looked wonderfully like a schoolboy. She stood at the looking glass for a long time. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself before he looks at me a second time, he'll say I look like a girl who sings and dances for money. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7, Jim's dinner was ready for him. Jim was never late. Della held the watch chain in her hand and sat near the door where he always entered. Then she heard a step in the hall and her face lost color for a moment. She often said little prayers quietly about simple everyday things, and now she said, "Please God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in. He looked very thin and he was not smiling. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and with a family to take care of. He needed a new coat and he had nothing to cover his cold hands. Jim stopped inside the door. He is as quiet as a hunting dog when it is near a bird. His eyes looked strangely at Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not understand. It filled her with fear. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor anything she had been ready for. He simply looked at her with that strange expression on his face. Della went to him. "Jim, dear," she cried, "don't look at me like that. I had my hair cut off and sold it. I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a gift. My hair will grow again. You won't care, will you? My hair grows very fast. It's Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim slowly. He seemed to labor to understand what had happened. He seemed not to feel sure he knew. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me now? I'm me, Jim. I'm the same without my hair." Jim looked around the room. "You say your hair is gone," he said. "You don't have to look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone too. It's the night before Christmas. Be good to me, because I sold it for you. Maybe the hairs on my head could be counted," she said, "but no one could ever count my love for you. Shall we eat dinner, Jim?" Jim put his arms around his Della. "For 10 seconds, let us look in another direction. $8 a week, or $1,000,000 a year. How different are they? Someone may give you an answer, but it will be wrong. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. My meaning will be explained soon." From inside the coat, Jim took something tied in paper. He drew it upon the table. "I want you to understand me, though. Nothing like a haircut could make me love you any less, but if you open that, you may know what I felt when I came in." White fingers pulled off the paper, and then a cry of joy, and then a change to tears. For there lay the combs that Della had seen in a shop window and loved for a very long time. Beautiful combs with jewels perfect for her beautiful hair. She had known they cost too much for her to buy them. She had looked at them without the least hope of owning them, and now they were hers, but her hair was gone. But she held them to her heart, and at last was able to look up and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then she jumped up and cried, "Oh, oh." Jim had not seen his beautiful gift. She held it out to him in her open hand. The gold seemed to shine softly as if with her own warm and loving spirit. "Isn't it perfect, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at your watch 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how they look together." Jim sat down and smiled. "Della," said he, "let's put our Christmas gifts away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy the combs, and now I think we should have our dinner." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men. They were the first to give Christmas gifts. Being wise, their gifts were doubtless wise ones. And here I have told you the story of 2 children who were not wise. Each sold the most valuable thing he owned in order to buy a gift for the other. But let me speak a last word to the wise of these days. Of all who give gifts, these 2 were the most wise. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the most wise. Everywhere they are the wise ones. They are the Magi. And that's it. Next is your turn.
Alright, thank you, Nevis. It's great. Everyone loved it.
And the next one is yours, I guess. Whichever
Yes.
one it was. I forget.
Next one is Elves and the Shoemaker by the brothers Grimm. A shoemaker, by no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had nothing left but leather for one pair of shoes. So in the evening he cut out the shoes which he wished to begin to make the next morning, and as he had a good conscience, he lay down quietly in his bed, commended himself to God, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, and was just going to sit down to work, the two shoes stood quite finished on his table. He was astounded, and knew not what to say to it. He took the shoes in his hands to observe them closer, and they were so neatly made that there was not one bad stitch in them, just as if they were intended as a masterpiece. Soon after, a buyer came in, and as the shoes pleased them so well, he paid more for them than was customary, and with the money, the shoemaker was able to purchase leather for 2 pairs of shoes. He cut them out at night, and next morning was about to set to work with fresh courage. But he had no need to do so, for when he got up they were already made, and buyers also were not wanting, who gave him money enough to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. The following morning, too, he found the 4 pairs made, and so it went on constantly. What he cut out in the evening was finished by the morning, so that he soon had his honest independence again, and at last became a wealthy man. Now it befell that one evening not long before Christmas, when the man had long been cutting out, he said to his wife before going to bed, "What think you if we were to stay up tonight to see who it is that lends us his helping hand?" The woman liked the idea, and lighted a candle, and then they hid themselves in a corner of a room, behind some clothes which were hanging up there, and watched. When it was midnight, 2 pretty little naked men came, sat down by the shoemaker's table, took all the work which was cut out before them, and began to stitch and sew and hammer so skillfully and so quickly with their little fingers that the shoemaker could not turn away his eyes for astonishment. They did not stop until all was done, stood finished on the table, and they ran quickly away. Next morning the woman said, "The little men have made us rich, and we really must show that we are grateful for it. They run about so, and have nothing on, and must be cold. I'll tell thee what I'll do. I'll make them little shirts, and coats, and vests, and trousers, and knit both of them a pair of stockings, and do thou too make them 2 little pairs of shoes." The man said, "I shall be very glad to do it." And one night, when everybody was ready, they laid their presents all together on the table, instead of the cut-out work, and then concealed themselves to see how the little man would behave. At midnight, they came bounding in, and wanted to get to work at once. But as they did not find any letter cut out, but only the pretty little articles of clothing, they were at first astonished, and then they showed intense delight. They dressed themselves with the greatest rapidity, putting the pretty clothes on and singing, "Now our boys so fine to see, why should we longer cobblers be?" Then they danced, skipped, and leapt over chairs and benches. At last they danced out of doors. From that time forth they came no more, but as long as the shoemaker lived all went well with him, and all his undertakings prospered. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl, who was industrious and cleanly, and swept the house every day, and emptied her sweepings on the great leaf in front of the door. One morning, when she was just going back to her work, she found a letter on its heap, and as she could not read, she put her broom in the corner, and took the letter to her master and mistress. And behold, it was an invitation from the Elves, who asked the girl to hold a child for them at his christening. The girl didn't know what to do, but at length, after much persuasion, and as they told her that it was not right to refuse an invitation of this kind, she consented. Then 3 elves came and conducted her to a hollow mountain where the little folks lived. Everything there was small, but more elegant and beautiful than can be described. The baby's mother lay in a bed of black ebony ornamented with pearls. The coverlids were embroidered with gold. The cradle was of ivory, the bath of gold. The girl stood as godmother and then wanted to go home again, but the little elves urgently entreated her to stay 3 days with them. So she stayed, and passed the time with pleasure and gaiety. And the little folks did all they could to make her happy. At last, she set out on her way home. Then first they filled her pockets quite full of money, and after that they let her out of the mountain again. When she got home, she wanted to begin her work, and took the broom, which was still standing in the corner, in her hand and began to sweep. Then some strangers came out of the house who asked her who she was, and what business she had there. And she had not, as she thought, been 3 days with the little man in the mountains, but 7 years, and in the meantime her former masters had died. Third story. A certain mother's child had been taken away out of his cradle by the elves. And a changeling with a large head with staring eyes, which would do nothing but eat and drink, laid in his place. In her trouble she went to her neighbour and asked her advice. The neighbour said that she was carry the changeling to the kitchen, set it down on the earth, light a fire, and boil some water in 2 eggshells, which would make it laugh, and if he laughed, all would be over with him. The woman did everything that her neighbour bade her. Then she put the eggshells with water on the fire, and said, I am as old now as the western forest, but never yet have I seen any one boil anything in an eggshell. And he began to laugh at it. While he was laughing, suddenly came a host of little elves, who brought the right child, set it down on the earth, and took it away with them. Okay, so that's the end of the 3 stories of the Elves and the Shoemaker.
That was fantastic. Well, I guess I'll read the next one. And yeah. Alright. The Little Match Girl. It was dreadfully cold. It was snowing fast, and it was almost dark as evening came on. The last evening of the year. In the cold and the darkness, there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home, she had slippers on, it is true, but they were too much large for her feet, slippers that her mother had used until then. And the poor little girl lost them in running across the street when 2 carriages were passing terribly fast. When she looked for them, one was not to be found, and a boy seized the other and ran away with it, saying he would use it for a cradle some day when he had children of his own. So when the little girl went with her bare feet, that were red and blue with cold, in an old apron that she wore were bundles of matches, and she carried a bundle also in her hand. No one had bought so much as a bunch all the long day, and no one had given her even a penny. Poor little girl, shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, a perfect picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long flaxen hair, which hung in pretty curls about her throat, but she thought not of her beauty, nor of the cold. Lights gleamed in every window, and there came to her the savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve, and it was of this which she thought. In a corner formed by 2 houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sat, cowering down. She had drawn under her little feet, but still she grew colder and colder. Yet she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches, and could not bring a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her, and besides, it was cold enough at home, for they had only the house roof above them. And though the largest holes had been stopped with rosin rags, there were left many through which the cold wind whistled. And now her little hands were nearly frozen with cold. Alas, a single match might do her good if she might only draw it from the bundle, rub it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. So at last she drew one out. Whoosh! How it blazed and burned. It gave out a warm, bright flame like a little candle as she held her hands over it. A wonderful little light it was. It really seemed to the little girl as if she sat before a great iron stove with polished brass feet and brass shovel and tongs. So blessed it burned that the little maiden stretched out her feet to warm them also. How comfortable she was, but lo, the flame went out and the stove vanished, and nothing remained but the little burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell upon the wall it became transparent like a veil, so that she could see through it into the room. A snow-white cloth was spread upon the table, on which was a beautiful china dinner service, while roast goose, stuffed with apples and prunes, steamed famously and sent forth a most savory smell. And what was more delightful still, and more wonderful, the goose jumped from the dish, with knife and fork still in its breast, and waddled along the floor straight to the little girl. But the match went out then. Nothing was left to her but the thick, damp wall. She lighted another match, and now she was under a most beautiful Christmas tree, larger and far more prettily trimmed than the one she had seen through the glass doors at the rich merchants'. Hundreds of wax tapers were burning on the green branches, and figures such as she had seen in the shop windows looked down upon her. The child stretched out her hands to them, then the match went out. Still, the lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them as stars in heaven, and one of them fell, forming a long trail of fire. "Now, someone is dying," murmured the child softly, for her grandmother, the only person who had loved her, and who was now dead, had told her that whenever a star falls, a soul goes up to heaven. She struck yet another match against the wall, and again it was light. In the brightness there appeared before her the dear old grandmother, bright and radiant, yet sweet and mild, and happy as she had never looked on earth. "Oh, grandmother," cried the child, "take me with you. I know you'll go away when the match burns out. You too will vanish like the warm stove, the splendid New Year's feast, the beautiful Christmas tree." And lest her grandmother should disappear, she rubbed a whole bundle of matches against the wall. And the matches burned with such a brilliant light that it became brighter than noonday. Her grandmother had never looked so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both flew together, joyously and gloriously, mounting higher and higher, far above the earth. And for them there was neither hunger, nor cold, nor care. But in the corner, at the dawn of day, sat the poor girl, leaning against the wall with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and cold she sat with the matches, one bundle of which was burned. She wanted to warm herself, poor little thing, people said. No one imagined what sweet visions she had, or how gloriously she had gone with her grandmother to enter upon the joys of a new year.
Great, thank you, Nefis. I'm back. So the next one is a short poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are I think I know. His house is in the village though. He would not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow.
Where's
My
that
little
frosting?
horse must think it queer. Stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. It's a short story, the poem of Robert Frost.
Alright. Next one, I guess. This one is... We're almost done, for the people wondering. Next one is Merry Christmas. Yeah. My dear young friend, said Father Time, as he laid his hand gently upon my shoulder. You are entirely wrong. Then I looked over my shoulder from the table at which I was sitting, and I saw him. But I had known or felt for at least a half hour that he, as standing somewhere near me, you have had, I do not doubt, good reader, more than once that strange, uncanny feeling that there is someone unseen standing beside you, in a darkened room, let us say, with a dying fire, when the night has grown late, and the October winds sound low outside, and when through the dim curtain that we call reality, the unseen world starts for a moment clear upon our dreaming sense. You have had it? Yes, I know you have. Never mind telling me about it. Stop. I don't want to hear about that strange presentiment you had the night your Aunt Eliza broke her leg. Don't bother with your experience. I want to tell mine. You are quite mistaken, my dear young friend, repeated Father Time. Quite wrong. Young friend, I said, my mind, as one's mind is apt to in such a case, running to an unimportant detail. Why do you call me young? Your pardon, he answered gently. He had a gentle way with him, had Father Time. The fault is in my failing eyes. I took you at first sight for something under 100. Under 100? I expostulated. Well, I should think so. Your pardon again, said Time. The fault is in my failing memory. I forgot. You seldom pass that nowadays, do you? Your life is very short of late. I heard him breathe a wistful, hollow sigh. Very ancient and dim he seemed as he stood beside me. But I did not turn to look upon him. I had no need to. I knew his form and the inner and clearer side of things, as well as every human being knows by innate instinct, the unseen face and form of Father Time. I could hear him murmuring beside me, short, your life is short, till the sound of it seemed to mingle with the measured ticking of a clock somewhere in the silent house. Then I remembered what he had said. How do you know that I am wrong, I asked, and how can you tell what I was thinking? You said it out loud, answered Father Time, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. You said that Christmas was all played out and done with. Yes, I admitted, that's what I said. And what makes you think that? He questioned, stooping, so it seemed to me, still further over my shoulder. Why, I answered, the trouble is this, I've been sitting here for hours, sitting till goodness only knows how far into the night, trying to think out something to write for a Christmas story, and it won't go, it can't be done, not in these awful days. A Christmas story? Yes, you see, Father Time, I explained, glad with a foolish little vanity of my trade to be able to tell something that I thought enlightening. All the Christmas stuff, stories and jokes and pictures, is all done, you know, in October. I thought it would have surprised him, but I was mistaken. Dear me, he said, not till October. What a rush. How well I remember in ancient Egypt, as I think you'd call it, seeing them getting out their Christmas things, all cut in hieroglyphics, always 2 years or 3 years ahead. 2 or 3 years, I exclaimed. Pooh, said Time, that was nothing. Why, in Babylon they used to get their Christmas jokes ready, all baked in clay, a whole solar eclipse ahead of Christmas. They said I think that the public preferred them so. Egypt? Babylon? But surely, Father Time, there was no Christmas in those days. I thought, my dear boy, he interrupted gravely. Don't you know that there has always been Christmas? I was silent. Father Time had moved across the room and stood beside the fireplace, leaning on the mantelpiece. The little wreaths of smoke from the fading fire seemed to mingle with his shadowy outline. Well, he said presently, what is it that is wrong with Christmas? Why, I answered, all the romance, the joy, the beauty of it has gone, crushed and killed by the greed of commerce and the horrors of war. I am not, as you thought I was, 100 years old, but I can conjure up as anybody can a picture of Christmas in the good old days of 100 years ago. The quaint old-fashioned houses standing deep among the evergreens, with the light twinkling from the windows on the snow, the warmth and comfort within, the great fire roaring on the hearth. The merry guests grouped about its blaze, and the little children with their eyes dancing in the Christmas fire light, waiting for Father Christmas and his fine mummery of red and white and cotton wool to hand the presents from the Yuletide tree. I can see it, I added, as if it were yesterday. It was but yesterday, said Father Time, and his voice seemed to soften with the memory of bygone years. I remember it well. Ah, I continued, that was Christmas indeed. Give me back such days as those, with the good old cheer, the old stage coaches, and the gabled inns, and the warm red wine, the snapdragon and the Christmas tree, and I'll believe again in Christmas, yes, in Father Christmas himself. Believe in him, said Time quietly. You may well do that. He happens to be standing outside in the street at this moment. Outside, I exclaimed. Why doesn't he come in? He's afraid to, said Father Time. He's frightened, and he daren't come in unless you ask him. May I come in? Or call him in? I signified assent, and Father Time went to the window for a moment and beckoned into the darkened street. Then I heard footsteps, clumsy and hesitant they seemed upon the stairs, and in a moment a figure stood framed in the doorway, the figure of Father Christmas. He stood shuffling his feet, a timid, apologetic look upon his face. How changed he was! I had known in my mind's eye from childhood up the face and form of Father Christmas as well as that of old Time himself. Everyone knows, or once knew him. A jolly little rounded man with a great muffler wound about him, a packet of toys upon his back, and with such merry twinkling eyes and rosy cheeks as are only given by the touch of the driving snow and the rude fun of the north wind. Why, there was once a time not yet so long ago when the very sound of his sleigh bell sent the blood running warm to the heart. But now how has changed. All draggled with the mud and rain he stood, as if no house had sheltered him these 3 years past. His old red jersey was tattered in a dozen places, his muffler frayed and reviled. The bundle of toys I dragged with him in a net seemed wet and worn to the cardboard boxes gaped asunder. There were boxes among them, I vowed, that he must have been carrying these past 3 years. But most of all I noted a change had come over the face of Father Christmas. The old brave look of cheery confidence was gone. The smile that had beamed responsive to the laughing eyes of countless children around outnumbered Christmas trees was there no more, and in the place of it there showed a look of timid apology, of apprehensiveness, as of one who had asked in vain the warmth and shelter of a human home. Such a look as the harsh cruelty of this world has stamped upon the faces of its outcasts. So stood Father Christmas, shuffling about upon the threshold, fumbling his poor tattered hat in his hand. "Shall I come in?" he said, his eyes appealingly on Father Time. "Come," said Time. He turned to speak to me. "Your room is dark. Turn up the light. He's used to light, bright light, and plenty of it. The dark has frightened him these 3 years past." I turned up the lights, and the bright glare revealed all the more cruelly the tattered figure before us. Father Christmas advanced a timid step across the floor. Then he paused, as if in sudden fear. "Is this floor mine?" he said. "No, no," said Time soothingly, and to me added in a murmured whisper, "He's afraid. He was blown up in a mine in no man's land between the trenches at Christmas time in 1914. It broke his nerve." "May I put my toys on that machine gun?" asked Father Christmas timidly. "It will help to keep them dry." "It is not a machine gun," said Time gently. "See, it is only a pile of books upon the sofa." And to me he whispered, "They turned the machine gun on him in the streets of Warsaw. He thinks he sees them everywhere since then." "It's all right, Father Christmas," I said, speaking as cheerily as I could. while I rose and stirred the fire into a blaze. "There are no machine guns here, and there are no mines. This is but the house of a poor writer." "Ah," said Father Christmas, lowering his tattered hat still further, and attempting something of a humble bow. "A writer? Are you Hans Andersen, perhaps?" "Not quite," I answered. "But a great writer, I do not doubt," said the old man with a humble courtesy that he had learned, it well may be centuries ago in the Yuletide season of his northern home. "The world owes much to its great books. I carry some of the greatest with me always. I have them here." He began fumbling among the limp and tattered packages that he carried. "Look, the house that Jack built. A marvelous deep thing, sir, and this, the babes in the wood. Will you take it, sir? A poor present, but a present still. Not so long ago I gave them in thousands every Christmas time. None seem to want them now." He looked appealingly towards Father Time, as a weak may look towards a strong for help and guidance. "None want them now," he repeated, and I could see the tears start in his eyes. "Why is it so? Has the world forgotten its sympathy with the lost children wandering in the woods?" "All the world," I heard Time murmur with a sigh, "is wandering in the woods." But out loud he spoke to Christmas in cheery admonition. "Tut, tut, good Christmas, you must cheer up," he said. "Here, sit in the chair, this biggest one, so beside the fire. Let us stir it to a blaze, more wood, that's better. And listen, good old friend, to the wind outside. Almost a Christmas wind, is it not? Merry and boisterous enough for all the evil times it stirs among." Old Christmas seated himself beside the fire, his hand stretched towards the flames. Something of his old-time cheeriness seemed to flicker across his features as he warmed himself at the blaze. "That's better," he murmured. "I was cold, sir, cold, chilled to the bone. Of old I never felt it so. No matter what the wind, the world seemed to warm about me. Why is it not so now?" "You see," said Time, speaking low in a whisper from my ear alone, "how sunk and broken he is. Will you not help?" "Gladly," I answered, "if I can." "All can," said Father Time. "Every one of us." Meanwhile, Christmas had turned towards me, questioning eye, in which, however, there seemed to revive some little gleam of merriment. "Have you perhaps," he asked, half timidly, "schnapps?" "Schnapps," I repeated. "Aye, schnapps. A glass of it to drink your health might warm your health again, I think." "Ah, something to drink," I said. "Is one failing? If it is one," said Time. "Forgive him, he was used to it for centuries. Give it to him if you have it." "I keep a little in the house," I said reluctantly, perhaps in case of illness. "Tut, tut," said Father Time, as something as near as could be to a smile passed over his shadowy face. "In case of illness. They used to say that in ancient Babylon. Here, let me pour it for him. Drink, Father Christmas, drink." Then his eye fell upon the mantelpiece, where lay among the litter of books and pipes a little toy horse. "Ah," said Father Christmas, almost happily, "children in the house." "One," I answered, "the sweetest boy in all the world." "I'll be bound he is," said Father Christmas, and he broke now into a merry laugh that did one's heart good to hear. "They all are. Lord bless me, the number that I have seen, and each and every one, and quite right too, the sweetest child in all the world. And how old, do you say? 2.5 all, but 2 months except a week? The very sweetest age of all, I'll bet you say, eh? What? They all do." And the old man broke again into such a jolly chuckling of laughter that his snow-white locks shook upon his head. "But stop a bit," he added. "This horse is broken. Tut tut, the hind leg nearly fell off. This won't do." He had the toy in his lap in a moment, mending it. It was wonderful to see, for all his age, how deft his fingers were. "Time," he said, and it was amusing to note his voice had assumed almost an authoritative tone. "Reach me that piece of string. That's right. Here, hold your finger across the knot. There. Now then, a bit of beeswax." "What? No beeswax? Tut tut, how ill supplied your houses are to this day. How can you mend toys, sir, without beeswax? Still, it will stand up now." I tried to murmur my best things. But Father Christmas waved my gratitude aside. Nonsense, he said. That's nothing. That's my life. Perhaps the little boy would like a book too. I have them here in the packet. Here, sir. Jack and the Beanstalk. Most profound thing. I read it to myself often still. How damp it is. Pray, sir, will you let me dry my books before your fire? Only too willingly, I said. How wet and torn they are. He stood bowed over his little books, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. Then he looked up, the old fear upon his face again. That sound. Listen. It is guns. I hear them. No, no, I said. It is nothing. Only a car passing in the street below. Listen. Hear that again. Voices crying. No, no, I answered. Not voices, only the night wind among the trees. My children's voices, he exclaimed. I hear them everywhere. They come to me in every wind. And I see them as I wander in the night and storm. My children, torn and dying in the trenches, beaten into the ground. I hear them crying from the hospitals, each one to me, still as I knew him once, a little child. Time, time, he cried, reaching out his arms in appeal. Give me back my children. They do not die in vain, Time murmured gently. But Christmas only moaned and answered. Give me back my children. Then he sank down upon his pile of books and toys, his head buried in his arms. You see, said Time, his heart is breaking. And will you not help him if you can? Only too gladly, I replied. But what is there to do? This, said Father Time. Listen. He stood before me grave and solemn, a shadowy figure but half seen, though he was close beside me. The firelight had died down, and through the curtained windows there came already the first dim brightening of dawn. The world that you once knew, said Father Time, seems broken and destroyed about you. You must not let them know, the children, the cruelty and the horror and the hate that wrecks the world today. Keep it from them. Someday he will know. There, Time pointed to the prostrate form of Father Christmas. That his children that once were have not died in vain. That from their sacrifice shall come a nobler, better world for all to live in. A world where countless happy children shall hold bright their memory forever. But for the children of today, save and spare them all you can from the evil, hate, and the horror. Later they will know and understand. Not yet. Give them back their Merry Christmas and its kind thoughts and its Christmas charity, till later on there shall be with it again peace upon earth and goodwill towards men. His voice ceased. It seemed to vanish, as it were, in the sighing of the wind. I looked up. Father Time and Christmas had vanished from the room. The fire was low and the day was breaking visibly outside. Let us begin, I murmured. I will mend this broken horse.
Thank you, Nevis. Alright, let me open the next one. Yes, you were off. This one is not too long, so this is Vanka by Anton Chekhov. Vanka Chekhov, a boy of 9 who had been for 3 months apprentice to Alain the Shoemaker, was sitting up on Christmas Eve, waiting till his master and mistress and the workmen had gone to midnight service. He took out of his master's cupboard a bottle of ink and a pen with a rusty nib, and, spreading out a crumpled sheet of paper in front of him, began writing. Before forming the first letter, he several times looked around fearfully at the door and the windows, so a glance at the dark icon, on both sides of which stretched shelves full of glass, and heaved a broken sigh. The paper lay on the bench while he knelt before it. Dear Grandfather, Constantin Margaret, she wrote, I'm writing you a letter. I wish you a happy Christmas and all blessings from God Almighty. I've neither father nor mother. You're the only one left me. Vanka raised his eyes to the dark icon, on which the light of his candle was reflected, and vividly recalled his grandfather, Constantine, who was night watchman to a family called Zephyrot. He was a thin but extraordinarily nimble and lively little old man of 65, with an everlastingly laughing face and drunken eyes. By day he slept in the servants' kitchen, or made jokes with the cooks. At night, wrapped in an ample sheepskin, he walked around the grounds and tapped with his little mallet. Old Kashtanka, an eel, so called on account of his dark color and his long body like a weasel's, followed him with hanging heads. This eel was exceptionally polite and affectionate, and looked with equal kindness on strangers and his own masters, but had not a very good reputation. Under his politeness and meekness was hidden the most suitable cunning. No one knew better how to creep up on occasion and snap at one's leg, slip into the storeroom, or steal a hen from a peasant. His hind leg had been nearly pulled off more than once. Twice he had been hanged. Every week he was thrashed till he was half dead, but he always revived. At this moment grandfather was, no doubt, standing at the gate, screwing up his eyes at the red windows of the church, stamping with his high felt boots, and joking with the servants. His little mallet was hanging on his belt. He was clasping his hands, shrugging with a cold, and, with an aged chuckle, pitching first the housemaid, then the cook. "How about a pinch of stuff?" he was saying, offering the women his. The women would take a sniff and sneeze. Grandfather would be indescribably delighted, go off into a merry chuckle, and cry, "Tear it off, it has frozen on." They give the dogs a sniff of snuff too. Kashtanka sneezes, wrinkles her head, and walks away offended. Eel does not sneeze from politeness, but wags his tail. And the weather is glorious. The air is still, fresh, and transparent. The night is dark, but one can see the whole village with its white roofs and coils of smoke coming from the chimneys. The trees silvered with hoarfrost and snowdrifts. The whole sky is sprinkled with gay twinkling stars, and the Milky Way is as distinct as though it had been washed and rubbed with snow for a holiday. Vanka sighed, dipped his pen, and went on writing. And yesterday I had a wagging. The master pulled me out into the yard by my hair, and wagged me with a boot stretcher because I accidentally fell asleep while I was rocking the bread in the cradle. And a week ago the mistress told me to clean a herring, and I began from the tail end, and she took the herring and thrust his head in my face. The workmen laughed at me and sent me to the tavern for vodka, and tell me to steal the master cucumbers for them. And the master beats me with anything that comes to hand, and there's nothing to eat. In the morning they give me bread, for dinner, porridge, and in the evening bread again. But as for tea or soup, the master and mistress gobble it up themselves. And I'm put to sleep in the passage. And when the wretched brat cries, I get no sleep at all, but have to rock the cradle. Dear grandfather, show the divine mercy, take me away from here, home to the village. It's more than I can bear. I bow down to your feet and will pray to God for you forever. Take me away from here, or I shall die. Vanka's mouth worked. He rubbed his eyes with his black fist and gave a sob. I will powder your snuff for you, he went on. I will pray for you. And if I do anything, you can thrash me like Cedar Scrode. And if you think I've no job, then I will beg the steward for Christ's sake to let me clean his boots. I'll go for shepherd's boy instead for Fredka. Dear grandfather, it is more than I can bear. It's simply no life at all. I wanted to run away to the village, but I have no boots, and I'm afraid of the frost. When I grow up big, I will take care of you for this, and not let anyone annoy you. And when you die, I will pray for the rest of your soul, just as for my mummy's. Moscow is a big town. It's all gentlemen's houses, and there are lots of horses. But there are no sheep, and the dogs are not spiteful. The lads here don't go out with a start. and they don't let anyone go into the choir. And once I saw in shop window fishing hooks for sale, fitted already with a line for all sorts of fish, awfully good ones. There was even one hook that would hold a 40-pound sheatfish. And I've seen shops with their guns of all sorts, after the pattern of the master's guns at home, so that I shouldn't wonder if they have 100 rubles each. And in the butcher's shop, there are grouse and woodcocks and fish and hares, but the shopmen don't say where they shoot them. Dear grandfather, when they have the Christmas tree at the big house, give me a gilt walnut and put it away in the green trunk. Ask the young lady Olga Ignatyevna, say it's for Vanka. Vanka gave a tremulous sigh, and again stared at the window. He remembered how his grandfather always went into the forest to cut the Christmas tree for his master's family, and took his grandson with him. It was merry time. Grandfather made a noise in his throat, the forest crackled the frost, and looking at them Vanka chortled too. Before chopping down the Christmas tree, grandfather would smoke a pipe, slowly take a pinch of snuff, and laugh at frozen Vanka. The young fir trees, covered with hot frost, stood motionless, waiting to see which of them was to die. Wherever one looked, a hare flew like an arrow over the snowdrifts. Grandfather would not refrain from shouting, "Hold him! Hold him! Hold him!" Ah, the bobtailed devil! When he had cut down the Christmas tree, grandfather used to drag it to the big house, and there set to work to decorate it. The young lady, who was Vanka's favorite, Olga Ignatyevna, was the busiest of all. When Vanka's mother's Pelagia was alive and a servant in the big house, Olga used to give him goodies, and having nothing better to do, taught him to read and write, to count up to 100, and even to dance a quadrille. When Pelagia died, Vanka had been transferred to the servants' kitchen to be with his grandfather, and from the kitchen to the shoemaker's in Moscow. "Do come, dear grandfather," Vanka went on with his letter. "For Christ's sake, I beg you, take me away. Have pity on an unhappy orphan like me. Here everyone knocks me about, and I'm fearfully hungry. I can't tell you misery it is. I'm always crying. And the other day the master hit me on the head with a last, so that I fell down. I love the wretch, worse than any dogs. I send greetings to Alyona, one-eyed Yegorda, and the coachman, and don't give my concertina to anyone. I remain your grandson, Ivan Zhukov. Dear grandfather, do come." Vanka folded the sheet of writing paper twice, and put it into an envelope he had thought the day before for a kopeck. After thinking a little, he dipped the pen and wrote the address. To grandfather in the village. Then he scratched his head, thought a little, and added, "Konstantin Markovitch." Not that he had not been prevented from writing. He put on his cap and, without putting on his little greatcoat, ran out into the street as he was in his skirt. The shopman at the butcher's, whom he had questioned the day before, told him that letters were put in post-boxes, and from the boxes were carried about all over the earth in mail carts, with drunken drivers and ringing bells. Vanka ran to the nearest post-box and thrust the precious in the slit. An hour later, lulled by sweet hopes, he was sound asleep. He dreamed of the stove. On the stove was sitting his grandfather, swinging his bare legs and reading the letters to the cooks. By the stove was Seal, wagging his tail.